Hey everyone, welcome to More Layers. I'm Seth Mariano.
I'm Jordan Smith, and for today's episode, one thing that we decided to talk about were villains, or in some cases, antagonists. Because we often see characters like from Disney, and we refer to them as villains, which makes sense because that's essentially what they are. But for other companies like Studio Ghibli, they might not always be seen as evil in the traditional sense, but more so just antagonistic. So we figured we'd take a look at Disney villains and Studio Ghibli antagonists and see how they differ.
Yeah. I had prior seen with a mutual friend of ours a YouTube video where someone did a kind of a deep dive into the difference between villains in Disney films and antagonists in Studio Ghibli films. And he kind of, one of the biggest points he made was the best storytelling involves a mix of both. There should be a sort of clear evil and dislike of it, but there should also be a clear understanding of where characters are coming from. And so we'll get a little bit into that tonight.
And I will say right off the bat, it's definitely good to understand where characters are coming from, but I know in recent memory, especially in some of Disney's works, they'll take a villain that previously existed and was just evil for the sake of being evil and try to make them like just misunderstood, which doesn't always fly. Uh, the first thing I wrote down is that Disney villains are more often straightforward and they follow a very similar storytelling path. And then there are quite a few Disney villains that you can tell they're the bad guy just by looking at them.
Yeah.
Whereas Studio Ghibli characters, a lot of them, they just appear like your average everyday human. Obviously, not all of them are that way. So it's more of never judge a book by its cover type of thing. Then, as I was mentioning, Studio Ghibli has humans oftentimes as antagonists, and their stories are often more what could be classified as grounded or real. The plots regarding how other characters interact with the antagonist is not as plain and simple. Even one of Studio Ghibli's more recognizable antagonists, often, I think their official name is No Face, isn't an antagonist that needs to be defeated, but rather understood, eventually to become a much more peaceful character.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't have that much acquaintance personally with the output of Studio Ghibli Studios, but I did, watch, the video kind of contrasting those with Disney villains, and I have kind of an idea, like, there are, like, one character that is, like, kind of considered a social justice warrior, more or less, and maybe their means are illegitimate, but the ends probably are legitimate, though.
I do agree, and full disclosure for our audience, I know much more about Disney than I do Studio Ghibli films. As a matter of fact, I've never actually seen a Studio Ghibli film, so I tried to do a little bit more research on the various characters to try and understand some of the more major differences and some good examples of what we've been talking about. And in a moment, I'm going to go through some antagonists from Disney, Studio Ghibli, as well as some outside franchises that I think are written well, that are indeed antagonists, but some aren't always seen as evil. And I'll even start with a Studio Ghibli character who, I hope I'm pronouncing the names correctly. I believe her name is Lady Ibashi, something like that. She's from one of the Studio Ghibli films. I forgot to write down the names of them. Uh, and from the research I found, or the research that I did, I found that a few people saw her as maybe arrogant, along with some other character traits, but she's not inherently evil. Uh, and some of the more heroic things you could say that she did was she looked after her people, and she specifically cared for, I guess, people that had leprosy, and even those with leprosy. I think there was one character in a scene that I watched that acknowledged that she was one of the only people that they knew that showed even the slightest concern for them. And on top of that, there were a lot of women that she got out of these terrible scenarios. Again, this is all from my research, full disclosure. Uh, and in the same vein, she would give those same women jobs so that they could have a living. So while she may be the antagonistic character, she's still doing a lot of good things that people not in the know may never figure out because that's the only way they see her.
Yeah, that is a good point, you know. Like, how do I put this? Some people, they'll be kind of oblivious, perhaps, to a legitimate thing that is happening. But sometimes it takes the actions, sometimes not as wise actions or attitude of someone else to kind of shed some light on it. I guess is kind of the big idea there.
Yeah, exactly. It's like when they say there's two sides to every story, uh, and based on what I understand, her side of the story hasn't always been told.
Right.
But the next one I wrote down, I felt was very relevant because we just had this character in our latest production of Beauty and the Beast. And I figured it would be good to talk about Gaston in this category. Because he's a special Disney villain in the sense that, like, yeah, you can still kind of tell just by looking at him compared to everyone else that he's probably going to be the bad guy. Even if you don't tell just by looking at him his behavior, you'd likely be able to tell. However, to most of the characters in the story, he's like the town hero. He's the guy that everybody looks up to and admires. There's a whole song dedicated to how the people of the town love and respect him in pretty much every possible sense. But he's still the overall antagonist. And one thing that I really love about the story with him is that his story is basically the Beast's story, but in reverse. Whereas the Beast starts off as a monster and gradually becomes more human. Whereas Gaston starts off as a human and even the town hero, but as the story progresses, he becomes more of a monster.
Yeah, oftentimes there's been the argument of like Beauty and the Beast is Stockholm Syndrome. Belle kind of submitted to the Beast because she was held captive, but I feel like people who say that don't consider that the Beast actually gradually matures and starts really listening more to Belle and starts acknowledging her feelings. Gaston never seems to do any of that by comparison.
Exactly. I mean, the Beast, when she runs off the first time, like, he wants her to leave. He's screaming, "Get out!" And he could have just left it at that, but he decided to go out and save her. And then not too long after that, when she realizes her father is in a perilous situation, he lets her go. And this is all because he genuinely cares about her. And by this point, she's starting to realize she genuinely cares about him. So he goes to save her, and she saves him. And then with Gaston, as I said, he starts off being human, but then the more he realizes that he's not getting what he wants, he turns to more drastic and evil measures, even going as far as to literally stab the Beast in the back. It's like he acts all high and mighty, and then he's being held over a ledge, and all of a sudden he turns into this whining coward. It's like, let me go, please, don't hurt me. And then the moment that happens, and the beast turns around, he's back to what he was doing a second ago, and that ultimately ends with his demise.
Yeah. Yeah. And even when the Beast is making demands of Belle, she doesn't even give in. And that's something Emma Watson acknowledged, I remember, in one interview that I saw a clip from. She doesn't give in, she doesn't submit. So she's not completely weak as those skeptics are insinuating.
Yeah, she's, to me, written as a character that a lot of people, women especially, would want to aspire towards. Whereas she's deemed one of the most attractive women in the town, but she doesn't flaunt it at all. She takes the time to get to know people. She doesn't let people step all over her, walk all over her, and she's willing to sacrifice her freedom, amongst other things, for those she cares about.
Yeah.
So it's not like she's just a pushover that just lets other people get their way with her. She genuinely stands up for herself. Like, even when she just rescued the beast and brings him back to the castle, she doesn't just become like, oh, he saved me, so I'll do whatever he wants. In the next scene, she's practically having a screaming match with him while she's tending to his wounds.
Yeah, more or less, yeah.
Exactly. And then another Disney villain I wanted to point to was Frollo. A lot of villains, again, you can tell just by looking at them, and they have these very unique, distinct appearances. Frollo is just a human, at least by appearance standards, and he literally is one. But at the same time, despite his competition, he could be seen as one of the most twisted Disney villains in their category. Because as one of the songs points out, he saw corruption everywhere except within. He sees a lot of the evil in the world, and yet he just seems to refuse to acknowledge any of the evil that's building within his own soul. And even when he technically acknowledges it, he tries in a way to justify it. Like, he is this old man kind of lusting after this girl that's likely in her mid to late teens, which is already messed up. But he has this whole song that's like, I understand that what I'm doing is wrong. However, I still want her to be mine and mine alone.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I feel like it's a hypocrisy. I feel like he was spending a good chunk of the time going on about how evil gypsies are and that kind of thing, and yet then later he makes a malicious attempt to seduce one.
Mm-hmm. He even has this really awkward scene where he's inside the church and has her in his grasp, and one of the things he does that made a lot of people uncomfortable, he like sniffs her hair. It's like, in the average modern world, at least around here, if somebody tried that now, they would be screwed. Like, their career would be done, their reputation would be shattered. But this guy, he uses his position of power to try and justify everything he's doing, and he gets away with it for a while. And the only reason he fails is because he's hanging off of a gargoyle type structure that ends up collapsing. If that didn't happen, he may have gotten away with everything.
Yeah. Well, one reaps what they sows in this life or the next, whichever one. In this life, we saw it happen there.
Yeah, and his last line in the movie is, and he's quoting scripture. where he's like, and he shall smite the wicked and plunge them into the fiery pit. And what happens to him in the next 10 seconds? He gets plunged into a literal fiery pit.
Yes.
And the next character I wanted to acknowledge is technically part of Disney, but that's only because it's in a movie that was in a company owned by Disney, specifically Marvel. I wanted to acknowledge Thanos, specifically from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's like, yes, he's evil. Yes, he's antagonistic. However, while he may have wiped out half of the universe and would stop at nothing if someone gets in his way, even killing someone he saw as his daughter, the main reason he went about doing this still made a lot of sense to people. It's like, yeah, it's mass genocide, and there's really no excuse for that. But at the same time, his reasoning for it is because he felt the population of the universe was growing too fast and there weren't enough resources to go around. So he decided if he got rid of half the population, then the remaining half would be able to thrive on what's left. And in some ways, he was right. He even acknowledged that the home of Gamora, who he saw as his daughter, after he did what he did and wiped out half of their population, the remaining half had clear skies, full bellies, and so on. So it's like, yeah, he's generally viewed as one of the most evil people, and for good reason. But at the same time, you get where he's coming from.
Yeah, it's kind of a survival of the fittest sort of thing, but it has that sort of issue of ends justifies the means at the same time.
Exactly. He basically took that concept to an extreme. Maybe too much of an extreme, but people still understood. And then I talked about this character a little bit in another podcast that Seth and I have participated in. This guy is from DreamWorks, specifically the Puss in Boots sequel, The Last Wish. And this is the wolf. And for those that don't know who he is or what role he plays in the movie, I don't want to spoil it if I don't have to. But I will say, like all these other characters, he's definitely antagonistic. And he actually loves what he does in some twisted ways. But I honestly still wouldn't call him full-on evil. Because technically, he was just doing his job. Okay, to make it make more sense, I will say who he is. He's basically the Grim Reaper. So I apologize if that spoils anything for anybody, but he is essentially a physical embodiment of death. And throughout the movie, he's looking to take Puss in Boots away, especially since he's down to his last life. And he teaches Puss about how important it is to value your life while you still have it. Because Puss in Boots, being a cat, he literally had 9 lives. He's lost 8 of them up to this point. And the wolf acknowledges that he hasn't valued any of them. So it's like, yeah, he psychologically torments Puss throughout the movie. And he is trying to take his last life before Puss really has a chance to live it. But he raises a valid point. It's like, if you're not going to value your other 8 lives, what's the point of even living this one out? But in the process of doing so, he teaches Puss to value the life that he does have, and he decides to spare him in the end. Which is a good message, because it's like, we all have one life.
Right.
And we should make the absolute most of it. Could he have gone a more, I don't know what the word is, he could have gone about it a bit more civilly, but maybe he thought that Puss in Boots would not take him seriously unless he did what he did, how he did it. And in the end, it did work, because Puss in Boots now, by the end of the story, realizes how important it is to value your life and those who are in it. So while he comes across as antagonistic, I feel like his role was very crucial. And then I had two other characters. One of them is from the Dragon Ball Super anime, and this character is named Jiren. Now, from what I understand, his story is told better in the manga as opposed to the anime, but I only really know him from the anime. I haven't read the manga version. But he is definitely the main antagonist in the arc where he's most focused on, but I still wouldn't call him evil. Because the main plot point by that spot in the story is that there's a multiverse thing going on, and there's fighters from each of them trying to protect their universe. Because this is like a one big battle royale between all of them, and if all the fighters from one universe get eliminated, their whole universe just gets erased. So he's really fighting to protect his universe. And it's revealed at some point that due to his master and other people he cared about being wiped out when he was young, he decided to rely on his own strength and no one else's from that point forward, resulting in him pushing others away. And when people try to teach him that it's good to rely on others for help, he's very reluctant at first. But when he starts to see by the end that, yeah, there is value in the strength you get from other people, he becomes more accepting of it. And he's definitely the main obstacle for the main heroes of the story. But really, he's in a desperate times calls for desperate measures situation. Then the last character I wanted to acknowledge, it technically comes from two different sources, but they tell essentially the same story. And because I really love this character anyway, I wanted to acknowledge Shadow the Hedgehog, particularly from the third Sonic film as well as Sonic Adventure 2, which the third film heavily borrowed from. It's like he was doing evil things and was working towards annihilating the entire planet, but he still isn't evil. Depending on the version of the story, his mind and memories were altered by the one who created him to lead him to want to do these things, because the one friend he had was taken away from him, and all he wanted was revenge. And he thought that the person he lost, her final wishes were to take revenge on those people, when in the end he realized that what she really wanted was for her, like her final wish was for him to help those people, to save them, to protect them. So before the plan he was originally helping carry out got too far, he decided to stop it and was ultimately successful. So he was an antagonist for a good chunk of the story, but when he realized what his friend truly wanted and saw the importance of those living on Earth, he quickly switched up what he did, ended up saving the world.
So, yeah. So that's all you had?
That's all I had, yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I wrote down a few specific examples of mostly you could maybe describe them as antagonists. I want to start with a handful of characters from the Netflix series Cobra Kai, which is an extension of the Karate Kid franchise. And One great thing about this show, I will say, is it's got a variety of like different perspectives, different levels of antagonism or evil, and so you get a handful of perspectives that are kind of juggled around, and and a big sort of driving force of the narrative that runs throughout is Johnny Lawrence, who was introduced, of course, in the first movie as sort of the enemy for the Karate Kid to ultimately defeat. And we see him decades later, now as a grown man with a troubled past, and you see him, getting into some legal trouble, struggle with alcoholism and things early on, and get himself into quite a bit of trouble. But it's made pretty clear from early on in the show that he's mostly misguided. He's simply led to believe that this super aggressive style of karate is the most logical, reasonable, right way to deal with opposition, discrimination, whatever is weighing down on you. And 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 he slowly realizes over the course of the show that that's actually not the wisest strategy. Contrast that with his old sensei, John Kreese, who pretty stubbornly kind of sticks to the old, pretty fascist, hyper-aggressive way that defines the Cobra Kai culture. And you never really see him really mature, or he kind of sticks to what he always believed is the most logical way. And as a result, a lot of younger people around him get really badly influenced. They cause trouble of their own. Some people get seriously hurt, and a lot of very unnecessary conflict occurs. And you see that happen particularly with kids who are suffering, specifically Tori and Hawk. They deal with problems like financial struggles and discrimination, and the only way they know how or see how to kind of overcome these issues is to beat the enemy hard down, ruthlessly, no mercy, as the mantra of Cobra Kai says. But over time, Tori and Hawk even, they kind of see the error of that, and they have their slip-ups, and they kind of have their cave-ins, even on and off. But they learn that there has to be some better way.
Yeah, well, I haven't seen the Cobra Kai show. I have seen the 3 original Karate Kid films, as well as the reboot in 2010 with Jackie Chan. And one thing I gathered from those is that a young person, especially a martial artist, can be heavily influenced by how they're taught.
Yeah.
So if some characters are more antagonistic, it could just be because they were taught to act or fight that way.
Yeah.
And one thing that I've seen in these movies, and in real life even, in some cases, is that a martial art should be used primarily for defense. You shouldn't use it for attacking other people or getting revenge.
Yeah.
So when they're taught to show no mercy or be extremely aggressive, chances are they're going to act that way, whether they inherently wanted to or not, because that's how they were taught. And it may take them a while to realize, hey, this isn't how I should approach things. I should really change.
Yeah. One of my favorite quotes from the show is when Johnny says, I never learned the difference between no mercy and no honor, and I paid a high price for it. Which is refreshing, because he's realizing, the ends may have been legitimate, but the means not so much. Kind of like we were talking about before.
And as it is commonly said, better late than never.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, and then a lot of these other characters maybe don't have as much of a growth arc, but they have definitely legitimate reasoning, even if their behavior is arguably despicable. And I thought of the Dursleys, Uncle Vernon and Aunt Petunia in the Harry Potter franchise. It's established early on, a relative of theirs, or two technically, were killed in a magic spell, and in a couple times or so during the books and the film adaptations, you see some magic happen where people are either getting hurt or something, and so the two aunt and uncle, they are very they're for the most part extremely against the whole idea of magic and the use of it. And they even say a couple times, don't you threaten my kid. You're not endangering my family. And they do some arguably disgusting things, specifically to Harry. Locking him up in a very tiny cupboard as his bedroom, starving him, and taking lashing out if he mentions innocently any even non-literal reference to magic. They go crazy, but you can kind of get, it may come partly from paranoia, as I kind of said.
Sorry, the cat that I'm currently sitting is right in front of me.
Yeah, don't mind that.
Alright, buddy, come on. Gotta go that way.
Yeah. And this is our mutual friend's family's cat?
Yeah, one of our fellow friends in Artists Unlimited, his family is currently away, so I volunteered to watch their cat, and he likes to climb on things. So I'm trying to make sure he doesn't interfere. But I don't know if I can stop him. Hello.
Yeah. Very bored, I guess.
Yeah, a little bit. He just wants some attention, I guess, and I'll be feeding him right after I'm done here, so he's probably waiting for me to do that.
Yeah. And taking then probably two of the most solid antagonists in animated film. I would probably say, specifically in a couple of the Toy Story sequels, the Prospector in 2 and Lotso Hug and Bear in 3.
Yep.
They have illegitimate means of kind of making their point. They kind of their strategy basically is to kind of hold other toys captive. But in their own twisted way, they seem to be thinking that's for their best and that's actually helping them, because they figure, owners, as far as they know, eventually outgrow toys. They kind of move on from them, and they kind of have no place typically to go, and they don't want to be, they themselves don't want to be stuck, without a place to belong or someone to call home. But still, they're kind of bullies in a way.
Yeah, it's kind of like some of the characters I mentioned where what they did was wrong, but you kind of understand where they're coming from. With the Prospector, he realized that children do grow up. There's not much that can be really done about that. And when their owner does grow up, chances are they'll be forgotten, neglected, or just tossed to the side. So he wanted to get both himself and his friends, as he saw them, in a position where they'll never get thrown away. They'll be admired for all of for the foreseeable future. Even if that means no one necessarily plays with them ever again, they at least won't be seen as garbage. Whereas with Lotso, he's very similar in that after he was replaced, he thought, like, this person didn't actually value me. I'm just a dime a dozen. I don't really matter. So he wanted to keep all the toys in a place where they could be played with, and even after certain kids grow up, they'd still have other kids that would come in later that would still play with them. So, yeah, he definitely did some bad things, like just after the other toys saved him, he immediately turns around and just leaves them to burn. But it's like, yeah, I was thrown away. I don't want this to happen ever again.
Yep, and another example, and one of my favorite movie sequels, honestly, The Santa Claus 2, starring Tim Allen. This is kind of more of an example of what happens if you take, like, something a bit too fundamentally, which is kind of one of the issues, at least early on in the Cobra Kai series. In this case, well, for context, the real Santa Claus kind of goes away from the North Pole for a while to deal with things at home. In his place, to kind of hold down the fort, they have a toy clone of Santa, also played by Allen, and they kind of task him with, all right, we need you to like study me like the Santa Claus handbook, learn everything about the policy and everything. He's like, right, and he does all that, but he takes it all a bit too fundamentally, like he sees, kids making some innocent petty misbehaviors, and yet they're on Santa's nice list anyway. Like, so their misconduct is arguably not exactly nasty, but he thinks it still warrants coal, and he thinks like no kid should be on the nice list this year. They should all get coal.
Yeah, I remember seeing brief clips from the second movie because I still haven't seen that one yet. And I remember looking at Santa and being like, why does he look more plastic
Yeah.
than usual? And now I understand that more. So now when I go and see this character, I'll better understand why he may act the way he does.
Yeah. And then probably a more classic example was in Legally Blonde, specifically Vivian Kensington, the Selma Blair character,
Mm-hmm.
who's kind of animus for most of the movie toward Reese Witherspoon's Elle Woods, and she is like the lady that Warner kind of moves on from Elle with,
Mm-hmm.
and she is she is arguably guilty of stereotyping blondes in the way that she kind of treats Elle cruelly, and there's this great back and forth line at one point. You discriminate against her because she's brunette. Why not? I'm discriminated against because I'm blonde, and she's probably used to seeing all blondes as kind of dim-witted and kind of lazy, materialistic, whatever, and to more or less an extent, Elle may be that because, actively anyway, because she's not really applying herself as much as she could be, and her motives may be ulterior in the beginning. Elle's motives for kind of enrolling into Harvard and going into law school, but then she shows a whole nother side of herself that a lot of people didn't expect any blonde woman to see. So, or anybody to see, I mean, in a blonde.
Yeah, of course. And that it's definitely relatable because there are plenty of stories out there, whether it be in cinema or books, TV shows, or in real life even, where people are treated a certain way based on how they look or one of their physical attributes. And I'm sure I don't need to go into extreme detail, especially if you know some basic history. But I feel like it's good to explore that in movies like this, because sometimes people won't see it in the real world. They'll turn a blind eye, but then when they see it happening in a movie, it may finally click in their heads, hey, this is a legitimate problem. And some people, while they may act a certain way, we gotta understand that they may be acting a certain way because they were treated that way. So that may be all they know, and they may transfer it, as you will, to someone else, so they know how they felt.
Had just one last example, and this is a film technically based on a true story of history, and so, well, the people in it are technically real. It's kind of a, in a way, it's sort of a cautionary tale of, of what parental pressure can do for the worst, and it's specifically the story of Chappaquiddick, based on the story of an incident involving Ted Kennedy, the youngest brother of President John F. Kennedy, who was, from what I understand, a favorite to win President of the United States himself. And then one night in 1969, he has too much to drink, goes for a drive in Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts, with one other woman in shotgun. And I think along the way, the car gets overturned, like lands in the water, and the passenger actually gets trapped under the water and eventually dies of asphyxiation. But and Ted is reluctant to let people know about this. I mean, the people closest to him know about it, but he doesn't want the public to know because he knows his dad really wants him to become the president because Joseph Kennedy has this sort of inferiority complex, or whatever you can call it, about him from being discriminated against, and so he wants to see, or arguably, his sons become president, so his heritage, his ethnic group, is more respected. And so Ted's got all this pressure on him to become president, and so he doesn't want the public to know that he did this thing, arguably caused this person's death. And so even though one person close to him says, you've got to own up to this, you got to take responsibility, he ignores that and gives a speech different than what he's given, and kind of gives another speech in order to cover this up and make his own dad happy, because he's putting all this pressure on him.
One thing that's for sure is that when you're in the public eye, especially in a political position, even the slightest error that you make can throw all the progress you've made out the window. And the fact that he tried to hide it ended up making it worse, because then people might think, what other secrets does he possibly have that he's not telling anybody? And one quote that I sometimes like to refer to, I don't remember which cartoon this is from. I think it might be Justice League Unlimited or one of those DC animated shows, where the Justice League finds out that the character Shazam is actually a child, and he only looks like an adult when he transforms. And Wonder Woman at some point says a lie of omission is still a lie. Just because you haven't said something one way or the other, the fact that you left out a crucial detail, it could still be considered a lie. And in terms of wanting to, I don't know if he wanted to, it's more like he had the pressure to uphold the standard that was set up by his father. So living up to the family reputation and doing the same thing that his family has been recognized for can be very grueling. So I understand why he may cave in under the pressure, because a lot of people may, because there's just so much expected of them. Like, one example that I like to think of sometimes in this type of storytelling is actually Sully from Monsters University. Because it's established early on, right after he's introduced, that his father is like this legendary scarer in the monster world. And the teacher immediately after says, I expect big things from you. And then later on, after Mike and Sully are in the human world, Sully basically says something about having to live up to the family name, and there's several hints of that throughout the story. And he's like, I act scary, but most of the time I'm terrified. It's like there's just so much pressure on him from so many other people to be really good at what he's heading towards in his career, because that's what his father did. And from what I understand in the story you're talking about, it's very similar, except this happened in real life.
Yeah. It's sad. It's like one of the most extreme cases, arguably, of the ends justify the means. It's
Exactly.
you know, someone is under a lot of pressure, and fulfilling someone's wish is prioritized over addressing a crime against an innocent person. It's just it's messed up.
Yeah, and sometimes they'll make messed up choices just so they make it perfectly clear. Like, I'm not this other person. I am my own person. I shouldn't be expected to be a carbon copy of them.
Well, anyway, thanks everyone for watching, listening. We'll be back probably in a couple weeks. Maybe do one last one for the season before we kind of get started with our Artists Unlimited production.
Mm-hmm.
And but you can keep up with us at Instagram, Seth_Mariano_AU, and YouTube and Spotify. And comments and questions are very much appreciated.
Yeah, any suggestions you have for future episodes, let us know what they are. If you have any questions about something we've already talked about or something we might talk about in the future, please send them to us. Because even if we're in like a hiatus or an off season, if you will, we still want to hear from you because we love to engage with you. We love to clarify anything you might be confused about and help you look forward to future episodes.
Yeah, and so until next time, which will probably be in a couple weeks, take care, everybody.
So long.